Kia ora, Helen Brahms here with today's edition of Genealogy and History. Today is May 8th, and boy, do we have some awesome things to talk about today. We're going to go from the very grim to the victorious to some places in between. We're going to be starting in, hang on, sorry, I got stuff popping up on my screen which is interrupting my notes. We're going to be starting in 1348 and going through to 1999. Whew, there's a lot of cool stuff that happened on this day in history. So, are we ready to get going? As we're going through, think about places that your ancestors have come from, that people in your family tree have come from. Where have they descended from? Then when we talk about the different events and things, jot them down, because somebody in your family tree may have been present or participated or witnessed that particular point in history. You may even have that person that we talk about in your family tree. So just jot down things of interest. What are those family rumors that are going around? Jot them down, because you may hear about some of them in today's edition of Genealogy and History. So, are we ready to get moving? All right, so we're going to start with the really grim stuff this morning. May 8th, 1348, a ship from Bordeaux carrying the plague lands in Malcolm Regis, which is now Weymouth in Dorset. The Black Death is the single worst pandemic in the history of the world, peaking between 1347 and 1351 in Europe. It estimates the death toll varied widely, but is generally believed to have killed between 50 to 125 million people. The Black Death was essentially the spread of the disease known as the plague, which is also sometimes referred to as the pandemic itself. It was caused by the, I've got to see if I can pronounce, I hate medical terms, Yersinia pestis bacterium, which was carried by the fleas. I never really liked rats and mice and all of those ones anyway. Okay, so moving to 1521, shake off the rats, we had the Parliament of Worms installs an edict against Martin Luther. Now, the Parliament of Worms was the actual town where they met, and it was the coming together of the Catholics, of these higher up people, because in 1517, an obscure German theologian by the name of Martin Luther published a document criticizing the Catholic of selling indulgences or actions performed to reduce the amount of punishment for sin. And that's pretty radical in 1521. And they actually called him and put him on trial and found him guilty of it. And so he was, for his writings and teachings, he was put on trial for hearsay, and on this day in 1521, he was excommunicated by the Pope at the Parliament of Worms. But as you know, his document led to the beginning of the Protestant faith. So that's a big significant piece of history there. Okay, so we're going from, where were we? 1521 to 1541, advancing in 20 years. The Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto and his expedition discovered the Mississippi River. And if you're wondering who Hernando de Soto is, he was commissioned by the Spanish crown to conquer Florida. His expedition consisted of 10 ships and 700 men, and they landed on the coast of Florida in 1539. He was one of the most successful Spanish conquerors, having worked as a slave trader in the Panama and in the West Indies, and as Francisco Pizarro's second in command during the conquest of Peru. He travels through the American Southeast in search of conquest and treasure that would last for 3 years. Remember, he first landed in 1539. In 1841, his expedition made the first European sighting of the Mississippi River. De Soto died of fever in 1542, and his body was interred in the Mississippi River. So I actually know some people with the last name De Soto. And I know some people with the last name Soda, and so when I read that, I was sort of wondering, I wonder if the Soto comes from De Soto, and they just dropped the D off the front of it. So, the brain's always working. In 1639, William Coddington founds Newport, Rhode Island. Happy birthday, Rhode Island. Newport. Uh, in 1787, the first U.S. prison reform society formed, the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons, led by Dr. Benjamin Rush. So, okay. In 1792, British Captain George Vancouver sites and names Mount Rainier in Washington. So if you ever wondered how Mount Rainier got its name, you can thank Captain George Vancouver for that. And he is, of course, the one that Vancouver, British Columbia, is named after. And also Vancouver, Washington, too. Yeah, because there's a Vancouver in Washington state. In 1792, the US established the military draft. In 1835, the first installment of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales was published by C.A. Riesel in Copenhagen, Denmark. And Hans Christian Andersen is best known for writing The Little Mermaid and The Ugly Duckling, two of my favorite fairy tales. In 1840, Alexander Walcott patents the photographic process. So, I wonder what the process was like back then in 1840. Because I remember learning how to develop photographs in a dark room with all the chemicals and things like that. But yeah, the photographic process, that actually taking the picture and developing it, I've got to learn more about that one. In 1847, Scott Robert Thompson patents the rubber tire. In 1877, this is for the dog lovers, this one. The first Westminster Dog Show was held on May 8, 1877. In 1878, David Edward Hughes wrote a paper on the idea for a microphone, and it was read before the Royal Society of London by Thomas Henry Huxley. In 1886, Jacobs Pharmacy in Atlanta sells the first Coca-Cola, which of course contained cocaine, as we all know if you know your Coca-Cola history. In 1899, and this is a little bit of Kiwi pride coming out in this one, Ernest Rutherford publishes discovery of two different kinds of radiation, alpha and beta particles. And if you don't know who Ernest Rutherford is, he is a New Zealand-born physicist and chemist and became known as the father of nuclear physics. In 1912, film and television production and distribution studio Paramount Pictures is founded. So they're doing their 100 and... Hang on, math is escaping me right now. 110 will be next year's 109th birthday today. In 1919, the first transatlantic takeoff by a Navy seaplane. Now, I couldn't find any information if it was successful, whether it was coming from England to the US or where the takeoff and landing was or anything like that. So all I could find was that it was the first transatlantic flight takeoff by a Navy seaplane. In 1919, Edward George Honey first proposes the idea of a moment of silence to commemorate the armistice of World War I and leads to the creation of Remembrance Day. And armistice happened on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918 when the First World War came to an end. And I always remember the 11th of the 11th of the 11th. Yes. Actually, yeah, so this is when they first proposed the idea to commemorate Armistice Day. Yeah. Okay, but there's another huge, you'll find out in a moment, thing to do with wars happening today. In 1933, Mahatma Gandhi begins a 21-day fast in protest against the British oppression in India. In 1945, now there's a very significant thing about today. In 1945, the German general Wilhelm Keitel formally surrenders to the Allies represented by the US, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union in Berlin. It became known as VE Day, Victory Over Europe Day. World War II ends in Europe after Germany signs an unconditional surrender. So this is the commemoration of VE Day, and VE stands for Victory Over Europe. So another big significant thing to do with the World Wars. In 1961, Alan Shepard received the NASA Distinguished Service Medal in Washington, and that would be for his flight, his orbit, being the first American in space. In 1962, Oskar Schindler and his wife Amelia, Emily, sorry, my apologies, Emily Schindler, are honored for saving 1,200 Jews during World War II in a ceremony on the Avenue of the Righteous in Jerusalem. And if you've seen the movie Schindler's List, then you will know the story behind the Schindlers. Okay, this is going to be one of my personal favorites, and I will be watching this shortly. On this day in 1963, the first James Bond film, Dr. No, starring Sean Connery, premiered in the United States. So yes, I will be honoring that. I will be commemorating that anniversary by watching Dr. No today. In 1970, the Beatles released their 12th and final studio album, Let It Be, in conjunction with the film of the same name. In 1976, the roller coaster Revolution, the first steel coaster with a vertical flip, opens at Six Flags Magic Mountain. 1976, wow. In 1980, on this day in 1980, the World Health Organization announced that smallpox had been eradicated. In 1980, the first non-stop trans-North American balloon flight departs Fort Baker in California. Maxie Anderson and her son Christian pilot the Kitty Hawk for 5 days. And our final one for today, in 1999, Nancy Mace becomes the first female cadet to graduate from the Citadel Military College. So that's our day in history. What are some of your connections in your family tree to these days in history, to the people that are mentioned? You know, you're bound to have somebody who was at one of these events. You know, did you ever, is one of your ancestors, somebody in your tree, did they go see Dr. No on this day in 1963? I know, I wasn't even around at that point. And even though For Your Eyes Only with Roger Moore was the very first James Bond movie I ever saw, Sean Connery was very quickly, when I learned about the James Bond movies, Sean Connery just completely outblitzed the other ones as far as I'm concerned. He was, he is and was and always will be the best James Bond out there. Although the other ones are very good as well. He's just smidgen above. But he was an incredible actor. And I loved watching his movies and everything else. But I especially liked him as James Bond. So what events that took place today appear in your family tree, whether it was somebody we mentioned or if it was some event that took place? So, you know, did you have someone in your family tree that was at the first Westminster Dog Show held today in 1877? You know, was any of your if you have good connection of, if you have deep roots within Georgia, especially in the Atlanta area, were any of your ancestors ones to try Coca-Cola when it first came out in 1886? You know, there's lots of really cool stuff in here. And then, of course, I'm seeing names in here, and I'm like thinking, I know somebody with a name similar to that name, spelled a little differently. And that's what happens with genealogy. You know, over time, names change. For example, you know, my last name is Brahms, and of course I'm married into that name. And people go, oh, you guys related to Johann Brahms, the composer? I went, nope. I said, not unless he changed his names from Abramsovich as well. So, because when my husband's ancestors first came to the US, they were Abramsovich. They shortened it to Abrams, and then later it became Brahms. So, you know, look back through time, because sometimes you've got times when names were changed for certain reasons, and it could be that they wanted to. It could be that the family may be in hiding, and so they changed their name. It could be because of adoptions that names got changed. It could be that they arrived here in the US and they wanted something, you know, from foreign countries, and they wanted something a little more American sounding or English sounding rather than wherever it was that they came from, because they, especially those that were escaping their countries because of religious persecution when they came to the US, a lot of them changed their names when they came into the country, and this is where the misconception of, oh, the people at Ellis Island changed their names because they couldn't spell their names. No, it is the people that were coming in that were Americanizing their names so that they could escape more of that connection to the persecution that happened as to why they fled the countries that they came from. So, you know, have a look through history. So I'm going to go and probably do some research, more research on this Hernando de Soto, because I know some de Sotas and I also know some Sotas where they don't have the DE in front. So are they people who may have descended from the de Soto family that Hernando de Soto was part of? And did they eventually drop the DE part of the de Soto and just became Soto? So you never know. Things happen for a reason. Things change. People change. Some people will change their name because they don't like the association with somebody in their family tree. It could be they don't like the beliefs that a person in their family tree had, so they want to make sure they sever any connection with that family by changing their name, so that when the descendants come along later on, there is no connection to that until somebody finds that one little clue that says, hang on, look at this, and look at this, and census reports are really good for those sorts of things, because on census reports, especially if they've lived in the same house, and the U.S. federal census was every 10 years, so on the zeros. So we had the census last year, and then we've had them, on the zeros ever since, well, up until then. But you can go back, and in some cases, you can actually look through the different census reports and all of that, and you have people who completely just disappear off the census report. They got married 2 years before a census, so they got married in, say for example, they got married in 1928, and you come to the 1930 census and there's no trace of them anywhere. And you're like, what on earth happened? So you go back to 1928, you look in the phone directory, if they had phone directories at that time, you look there, you find them in there under the name that they were in, the address and all of that. And then you go to the census report that was taken in that town, in that county, 2 years later, and you look through, find that address, and oh, they have a different last name, but the first names are the same. Oh, and there's their son there. Yeah, we already knew about the son. Huh. I wonder if they changed their name. So you never know. You never know. And then there's a lot of rumors that are out there. Some we will be able to uncover the truth of. Some we won't be able to, because the paper trail may not be there. But of course, paper trails these days, a lot of it requires boots on the ground, because there's only 5% of all genealogical records actually online right now. So if you think of that and you can't find that one document you need, you might have to do some little work like contacting the local family history society within the area. There's a lot of places they will have, like here in the US, the states, they will have state historical societies, county historical societies, towns historical societies. Some of them will just be the historical societies, and some of them will actually put genealogy in there or family research in there because of the prominence of that area, depending on it. But there's always those people at the historical societies and stuff that you can get hold of and go, hey, I'm researching my family and I came across this and this and this. Do you have any, and I need to come out there and have a look. Where could I go? And they may even be able to help you, so you don't even have to fly out there to check the things. But the historical societies and genealogy societies or family history societies are great resources where you can go and help find out information about events that happened during that time when your ancestors lived there and that. Anyway, if you would like more assistance with your family tree research, please go to helenconnects.com. The link is in the description. And have a super fantastic sparkling day, and we will catch you guys tomorrow for May 9th. I'm off to watch Dr. No. Hej, Gonera.